Hello everyone, I am the Meta Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this 9th season premiere of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Dominaria United, Hazezon Sand Shaper. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck texts, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Hazezon is a 3/3 human warrior with Desert Walk for 1 red, 1 green, and 1 white. Not only does Hazezon let you play deserts from your graveyard, but whenever a desert enters the battlefield under your control, you create 2 1/1 tokens. To say that Hazezon wants to be built around desert-typed lands is an understatement. These abilities are quite powerful though, since a lot of deserts have built-in sacrifice effects or can be cycled. Thus, you can potentially get that trigger each turn. You might even think that his Desert Walk ability is more cheeky than anything, but thanks to Bazaar Trader, you can trade away a desert you don't really need in case you want to be able to smack that opponent with an unblockable Hazezon. Since both of his abilities synergize so well together, the deck went not only for a landfall theme but also a tokens one. Thus, it'll be making the most out of lands entering the battlefield from hand and graveyard, plus going into the graveyard from the hand or the battlefield. In turn, this will continuously fuel the landfall effects. Sylvan Safekeeper and Aura Fracture are repeatable ways of sacrificing lands since they're absolutely free, not even requiring tapping. The Safekeeper is amazing at giving our commander or other key creatures Shroud at instant speed. The enchantment is amazing at wiping the board of enchantments. However, once a recursion engine is built, if there are no targets for Aura Fracture, you can't really activate its ability. Same with Sylvan Safekeeper. Once all of our creatures have Shroud, we can't target them with it anymore. That being said, they're still amazing engine pieces which we'll soon see. Constant Mist, Dwarven Army, and Goblin Trenches are all repeatable ways to sacrifice lands so long as you have the mana to pay for their abilities. Each one requires 2 mana and sacrificing a land and can all be done at instant speed, except for the Armory, which can only be activated during an upkeep step. That being said, we can activate it as many times as we want during any upkeep, which is great. We can do it all during an opponent's upkeep, preferably the opponent before us. It's a great effect at permanently pumping a potential beater or even Hazezon himself, especially since the counter is a +2/+2 counter and not a +1/+1 counter. Constant Mist is absolutely crazy here since we can basically fog as often as we want to. So long as we're sacrificing a desert, we can just replay it later with Hazezon. This essentially saves us from combat damage all the time unless someone counters it. Goblin Trenches follows with the theme of the deck of creating 2 multicolored 1/1s, but we'll see more of the deck's token support in a bit. Elvish Reclaimer, Scapeshift, Harrow, and Whirling Regrowth sacrifice lands in order to fetch for more lands. The first one, being on a permanent, is possibly the best one since it's repeatable. You just sacrifice a desert to get absolutely any land you want, preferably a utility land, and then you can replay that sacrificed desert to continue ramping. Harrow and Whirling Regrowth are essentially the same spell, if only ever so slightly different. But in essence, they're both 2G instants that sacrifice a land to ramp for 2 basics. Naturally, we're going to try and sacrifice a desert as payment. Also, they're instants, so try and do it at the end of the turn before yours. Scapeshift is still possibly the best one though. You can sacrifice as many lands as you want, but the deck is running all deserts printed as of the making of this video, which add up to 16, almost half of the deck's lands. Safe to say you'll have plenty of deserts to sacrifice to Scapeshift and then start bringing back from the graveyard with Hazezon. However, thanks to Ancient Green Warden and Splendid Reclamation, we don't have to rely so much on our commander, nor sacrificing solely deserts. While Hazezon is cheap to cast and could probably be cast multiple times in a game, the Green Warden has a similar ability of land resurrection, but not limited to deserts. On top of that, it also helps double trigger landfall effects, which is absolutely insane in this deck, so it does double work. Oh, and it's also a 5/7 with reach for 6 mana, if that weren't enough. Splendid Reclamation can get all lands into our graveyard right onto the battlefield. Even though they enter tapped, casting this after Scapeshift is such a satisfying play. Speaking of getting multiple lands onto the battlefield, the deck is obviously running Azusa Lost but Seeking, Storm Cauldron, Mina and Den Wildborn, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Exploration, Wayward Swordtooth, and Druid class. All of these let you play an additional land per turn, with Azusa letting you play 2 additional lands per turn. Not only is this helpful to play multiple lands from your hand, but also multiple lands from your graveyard. Remember the engines I mentioned earlier? Well, having any of these in play allow you to sacrifice a desert to one of those effects and then replay it from the graveyard multiple times in a turn. so you can ramp multiple times with Elvish Reclaimer, destroy multiple enchantments with Aura Fracture, etc. Granted, with Druid class you have to take it to level 2, but that's just a 5 mana total investment, which is fine. Dryad of the Elysian Grove is also super important for the deck, since it allows our lands to tap down for any color of mana, which is clutch when so many of the deck's lands tap for colorless, because that's how it is with most of the deserts, which we'll soon see. Something to note is how amazing Storm Cauldron and Mina and Den are in particular, and how they interact with certain cards in the deck. Storm Cauldron is absolutely backbreaking because it's symmetrical. Yes, your opponents will also be able to play an additional land during their turns, but anytime they tap a land for mana, they have to bounce it. That's not such a big deal for us if we have multiple land playing effects in play, such as the ones seen here. Running all deserts means that the deck's running the 3 with cycling. We can cycle it away, draw the card, then replay it with Hazezon, bounce it to our hand, and then do it all over again. That's just one interaction that's incredibly useful here. So if you're in a pinch to draw cards, that's something you can take advantage of. As for the other ways we're making the most of playing multiple lands per turn, or even just guaranteeing a land drop each turn via recursion, is the deck's landfall effects. Felidar Retreat, Scoot Swarm, Maja Brideguard Protector, Rampaging Baloths, and Field of the Dead in particular, since they're part of the tokens strategy of the deck. Having multiples of these in play is amazing because we're getting a ton of creatures each time we drop a land, regardless of where it's coming from, whether our hand, graveyard, or library. Maja and the enchantment in particular are great because they also pump our creatures. Once we have a large enough board, we can use the enchantment to pump that board instead of just popping out a token. You'd be surprised how much work this enchantment does. Naturally, Screw Swarm is absolutely busted in a tokens deck. You're going to 100% need a calculator for this one, so I absolutely love it. Field of the Dead doesn't even take up a slot in the deck. Thanks to being 3-colored, the deck can be 100% singleton, even the lands, in order to never risk not triggering Field of the Dead. It's running one of each type of basic land, so even though it has 6 basic lands, they're all singleton as well thanks to the snow-covered lands. That way, once we have 7 lands, this will always trigger. Rumor Gatherer, Mentor of the Meek, and Aura Shards also love when the deck is making tons of tokens, each with landfall triggered. Unfortunately, Rumor Gatherer will only draw us 1 card each turn, but at least will scry every other trigger except for the second one. Mentor of the Meek does require paying mana to its trigger, but as we have the mana we can draw the card. It's such a shame that Inspiring Commander is a digitally exclusive card, since it triggers each time and for free. Plus we gain a life too. There's no reason for it to be so. It doesn't have Perpetually, Seek, a spellbook, etc. When will it get reprinted in paper for the first time? Who knows? Alright, rant aside, Aura Shards is another one of the deck's reusable interaction pieces. I don't know why so many players hate this card, since it only hits artifacts and enchantments. You can easily take care of it with enchantment removal of your own. But I digress. Now, one reason we want so many tokens is to overrun the board. Champion of Lamhold, Eldrazi Monument, Jetmir Nexus of Revels, Beastmaster Ascension, and Divine Visitation help with just that. Champion of Lamhold's Alliance ability makes it bigger, which in turn helps our creatures be unblockable. Granted, it has to be the biggest creature on the table, but given the amount of tokens we're creating, that shouldn't be an issue. Eldrazi Monument is another way to give evasion, but also a nice pump along with indestructibility, which is probably the more important thing. Since we have the potential of creating 2 Sand Warrior tokens each turn, we should be able to pay that upkeep cost no problem. Jetmir is another busted way to pump our board while also giving our creatures Vigilance, Trample, and Double Strike once we control 9 creatures, which, again, not a problem here. Same with Beastmaster Ascension. We can either do it little by little or get that +5/+5 all at once by attacking with 7 tokens the first time. Divine Visitation is absolutely busted here. Most of the tokens created by the deck are either 1/1s or 2/2 weenies, but this turns them into 4/4 angels with flying and vigilance instead. Absolutely busted. It does non-bow with Scoot Swarm, so keep that in mind if you want absurd quantity over slight quality. Halo Fountain takes further advantage of the swarm of creatures we're creating by simply winning us the game outright. If we swing in with 15 tokens, we can pay 5 white, tap it, and then untap them to win the game, all before blockers are even declared. If that weren't enough, its 2 other abilities are also so useful, especially since it's giving us more weenie tokens or drawing us cards. Morag Fury of Akum is another way to potentially end the game by getting us a ton of combat steps each turn. And not only that, but he's also pumping all of our attackers each time too, so the effect is cumulative. Imagine triggering Landfall 5 times in a turn. Not only are we getting 6 total combat steps, but we're also pumping those attackers +1/+0 each time they're attacking. Stacking that with other pumps could potentially have you wipe the whole board, especially if they're unblockable or even flying. Ashnod's Altar is another way to possibly get that done due to its combo potential. When integrated into engines that create creature tokens, it allows us to generate it further, albeit not reaching infinity. For example, let's say we have Hazezon, Goblin Trenches, Ashnod's Altar, and some nondescript desert in play. We can start off the chain by sacrificing some token to the altar, getting us 2 colorless mana. We can then use that mana and sacrifice in the desert to pay for Goblin Trenches, getting us 2 1/1 Goblin Soldiers. We replay the desert once with Hazezon, creating 2 more 1/1s. Notice that we're back to where we started, but with a net gain of 3 1/1 creature tokens. If we had something like Azusa in play, we can do this twice more. Depending on the desert sacrifice, we can get further value too. Sunscorched Desert could ping a player when it enters the battlefield, but we'll see all the deserts in a bit. The point is that Ashnod's Altar is not only great on its own as mana acceleration, but as part of some of the engines we previously saw. Going back to getting value from the landfall effects in the deck, Nissa Vital Force can draw us a card each time. Well, we have to get her emblem first, but that's incredibly easy to do. She only needs to survive 1 full turn around the table, but her +1 creates quite the blocker, so she defends herself. The emblem is absolutely busted here, so don't feel bad about ultimating her as soon as possible. Tireless Tracker and Tireless Provisioner also provide value from landfall triggers, the former creating a clue to crack for drawing cards, and the latter creating a treasure to crack for mana. Yes, it could also create a food token, but that should only be used in dire straits. Treasure is the clear default option. Speaking of tokens, Risk the Redeemed, Doubling Season, Parallel Lives, Primal Vigor, and Anointed Possession should also be considered for the deck. Fortunately, Risk is amazing here and affordable, unlike the 4 enchantments. That being said, it should be painfully obvious how absolutely busted they are in this deck. However, if you don't already have them, can't afford them, or don't want to proxy them, the deck should still work fine without them. Just add some more effects that create tokens via landfall, and you can balance it out. As for the deserts in the deck, we have no choice but to run all of the ones that are currently available, considering that we probably won't get any new desert-type lands until a return to Amonkhet, or possibly visiting Wildfire for the first time, since that plane is connected to Rabia, a plane that we'll definitely never return to. In any case, let's start with the deserts that most synergize with the deck. Cradle of the Accursed, Endless Sands, Grasping Dunes, Hashep Oasis, Ramanop Ruins, Shefet Dunes, Scavenger Grounds, and Dunes of the Dead. These all care about being sacrificed, which the deck doesn't mind at all, since Hazezon will just replay them from the graveyard afterward. Being able to use these effects time and time again won't break games anytime soon, but it's good to know that the synergy allows us to use these effects even if we have no other sacrifice outlet for lands, so keep that in mind. Be careful though with Scavenging Grounds, since the effect is symmetric, so only use it against a Reanimator deck or a Graveyard Matters deck, since you also care about your own graveyard. That being said, it's still worth including along with the other deserts, especially since none of these take up slots in the deck. Same with Desert of the Fervent, Desert of the Indomitable, and Desert of the True. As previously mentioned, we can cycle these away to draw the card, but still get the land onto the battlefield by playing it from the graveyard with Hazezon. We can then bounce them to our hand to do so all over again if we need to draw a card, all without taking up a slot in the deck. The final deserts in the deck, Desert, Hostile Desert, Survivor's Encampment, Painted Bluffs, and Sunscorched Desert, are included solely for being deserts, but we can still get value from them from the abilities they have. Again, not groundbreaking by any metric, but also not entirely useless. And they're great donation fodder for Bazaar Trader if you want to make Hazezon unblockable for the shits and giggles. Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, while not a desert, is perhaps one of the most important lands in the deck because most of these deserts only tap for colorless mana. It's not even that difficult to get to thanks to cards like the previously mentioned Elvish Reclaimer and Scapeshift, as well as Hour of Promise, which is also in the deck. Not only does this sorcery get us any 2 lands from our library right to the battlefield, but if we control 3 or more desert-type lands, it'll create a 2/2 zombie token for us as a nice bonus. The following cards in the deck are the essential responses, card advantage, and mana acceleration of any deck. Skull Clamp is an obvious include since most of the creature tokens are 1/1s, assuming no toughness buff are on the battlefield yet. Paying 1 generic to draw 2 cards off of equipping this to a Sand Warrior token is too good to pass up. Collective Unconscious, Shamanic Revelation, and Camaraderie are more ways to turn our tokens into card draw by taking advantage of epic board states to draw into blue mage levels of cards. These sorceries are no joke. Same with effects from cards like Toski Bearer of Secrets and Aran Frostfang. If we do decide to go for the face and swing in with a ton of tokens, chances are that enough of them are going to get through to draw us into a ton of cards if we need them. Thanks to the Frostfang giving Death Touch to those attacking tokens, they will either trade with blockers or draw us cards. So good. Reliquary Tower is included due to how many cards the deck can draw into. While it's yet another colorless mana source, Yamavaya can at least help it tap down for green, so it's not so bad. Generous Gifts, Beast Within, and Chaos Warp are important cards to be drawing into since these catch-alls can get rid of anything at instant speed. Sure, they can gift our opponents something in exchange, but a 3/3 won't really do much to us, and Chaos Warp requires some epic luck to be a downside. Boar's Charm, Heroic Intervention, Teferi's Protection, and Flawless Maneuver are some more cards we definitely want to be drawing into. Last thing we need is for someone to board wipe all of our hard work amassing tokens to nothing. Unfortunately, only Teferi's protection can protect our board state from mass exile, bounce, and tuck effects, but thanks to its reprint in Double Masters 2022, it's once more relatively affordable. Plaza of Heroes is another protective effect, but only for Hazezon. This commander format all-star doesn't even take up a slot in the deck, and can tap for any color to cast our commander, and then tap for any color for anything else once we do have our commander. So good. The deck isn't running any other protective effects for Hazezon though, since he only costs 3 to cast the first time, the deck is green, and there are so many redundant effects in the deck that opponents are going to have a hard time throwing wrenches in all of our engines anyways. Blasphemous Act and Hour of Reckoning are included in case we are the ones who have to wipe the board. At least Hour of Reckoning has the potential of being free while also keeping our tokens alive, which in all honesty will be most of our board anyways. Bonus points for casting an indestructible instant effect in response to our own Blasphemous Act on the stack. As for mana acceleration, the deck is still running Farseek, Rampant Growth, and Into the North to get ahead. While there are other ways of accelerating, you can't go wrong with these. Farseek can get 7 lands from the deck, Rampant Growth 6, and Into the North 6, so they're amazing early game. And in any case, they help trigger landfall effects at any point of the match. Birds of Paradise, Bloom Tender, and Favorable Elder are the deck's mana dorks just because of how amazing they are here. Especially the last two, since they can tap down for all 3 colors from just Hazezon alone, or even just one of his Sand Warrior tokens. Sol Ring is the only mana rock in the deck because there's no reason not to run it. Sure, it doesn't help when casting Hazezon, but it'll help pay for that commander tax the first time. The rest of the deck is just the rest of the lands. The deck's running all 3 Shock lands, all 3 Snow Duels, Jetmir's Garden, and Command Tower, as well as one of each basic land and snow-covered basic land, as previously mentioned due to Field of the Dead. As with all of my deck techs, you can build your mana base according to your budget. Whether you include more expensive cards or even cheaper cards is up to you. You do you. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Hazezon Shaper of Sand. What I love about Hazezon is the flavor tied to it, plus the call back to the original Hazezon Tamar card, which you can also include in this deck if you wanted to flex. That being said, the deck performs best with overlapping token and landfall strategies since you're essentially doing both things at once, so you want to make the most of both of them, sort of like what I did. That being said, you can definitely go further in either direction if that's what you want to do as well. Hazezon isn't too strict of a commander when it comes to strategies. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am Commander Kirby, and happy brewing.